So maybe like some of you, I've been a little bit frustrated with current politics, right? Shocker, right? I'm frustrated because I've felt a little bit like maybe my American values have been compromised. Frustrated because I feel like I'm watching the breakdown of what I once thought were pretty steadfast governmental institutions. I felt a little bit like John McCain sitting in the Senate and saying, "Can we just return to regular order?" Right? And I've been frustrated because I felt a little bit like I can't do anything about it. But then there have been these moments of great reprieve, moments where I've felt really encouraged, really hopeful, and genuinely like I'm watching people step up to the plate in the face of what feels like a little bit of a breakdown. So now my intention today isn't to have some big motivational speech about how you should be a better citizen, although if you decide to do that, I'm not going to be mad about it, okay? But my intention is to draw our attention to the ways in which everyday citizens are stepping up to the plate and living out what they believe to be our true American values. So in the process of doing that, they are filling the gaps of where we're seeing our government be a little bit fledgling, right? So I want to talk about the ways that we are seeing that happen. I'm going to give a couple different kind of case studies and walk through where we're watching that happen. But I have questions for you. Have you ever really felt truly part of our democratic system? Have you considered how your skills or knowledge or passions or personal situations could contribute to a more free, a more just, or a more civil society? And I'm not just talking about running for office, although some of you probably should do that someday. I'm talking about seeing opportunities that might be hidden in your 8 to 5 or 5 to 10 or maybe your 10 to 3 a.m. Everyday lives, right? Where you could contribute to establishing a more just, a more tranquil, a more free society around you. So in case you weren't familiar, this is exactly what the American people were bent on doing at the writing of our Constitution. So as a refresher, for those of you that don't have your pocket Ks with you, we'll read it together, right? This is how our Constitution begins. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So what would really happen if we each felt personally responsible for making America what it could be, what our Constitution intended us to do? I'd argue that many in our country are beginning or continuing to do just that. Specifically in light of some major failures or cracks that we're beginning to see in our country's 3 existing branches of government. Regular people are stepping in to fill in the gaps, to take care of each other, and to uphold the law, where the government may not be doing that, and it's pretty beautiful. So first, I think it's important for us to go back to your 8th grade civics lesson and review the 3 branches of government and exactly what they're responsible for. So the reason that these 3 branches of government were established were for kind of 3 main reasons, right? One was to ensure that no individual or group would get too much power. Second was to set up a system of checks and balances. And third was to establish a system where the government could seek the best interest of the citizens. But I'd like to suggest a 4th column, the citizenry. And I would suggest that as the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch carries out the laws, and the judicial branch evaluates the laws, I would say that the citizenry lives out the laws, right? And as part of that responsibility, we have some tools available to us. We can protest, right? We can write our representatives. We can organize ourselves. But additionally, we're the ones that feel the pain first when we see these cracks in the system, right? When we see the effects of the other 3 branches of government doing or not doing their jobs well. We're the testing grounds, which means we find the flaws and we have to fix things sometimes on the fly. So I want to work through 2 different examples, and they're going to be incredibly simplified overviews of these topics. So as a political science student, it's hard for me to just run through these so quickly, but I'm going to do it for our benefit. So forgive me and roll with me here. So first, I want to talk about immigration and the travel ban, right? So the executive branch, this fine gentleman, the executive branch drafted and signed the legislation for the travel ban in January, which stated, in order to protect Americans, the United States must ensure that those admitted to this country do not bear hostile attitudes toward it and toward its founding principles. The United States cannot and should not admit those who do not support the Constitution or those who would place violent ideologies over American law. In addition, the United States should not admit those who engage in acts of bigotry or hatred, including honor killings, other forms of violence against women, or the persecution of those who practice religions different from their own, or those who would oppress Americans of any race, gender, or sexual orientation. So I wanted to read that whole sentence so that we could revel a little bit in the irony. Next, the legislative branch was not involved because it was an executive order, and for those of you a little bit less familiar with executive orders give the president limited powers to pass laws. So these laws are subject to the judicial review, however, so we'll get there. But what we did see from the legislative branch was quite a lot of comment afterwards. People who wanted to be siding with the president and those who wanted to be very far from the president on this topic. So what did the judicial branch do? The judicial branch heard the case, Washington v. Trump, in which the state of Washington filed suit alleging that this executive order was unconstitutional because it, among other reasons, violated the Fifth Amendment, the guarantee of equal protection under the law, because it was intended to harm and discriminate against their state's residents based on their national origin or religion. They also said that it therefore violated the Establishment Clause because it was meant to disfavor Islam and give preference to Christianity. So the government also argued that the Constitution grants the President of the United States unreviewable authority over immigration matters and that non-citizens and the executive order affected do not have due process rights. But on February 3rd, a judge issued a nationwide temporary restraining order which forbade the federal government from enforcing certain provisions of this executive order. The federal government, in turn, filed an appeal, yada, yada, yada. We know what happens next. So we see a little bit of how the three existing branches of government handled this very law, right? But what did the citizenry do? The citizenry showed up to airports, right? They made sure that those who were immediately disenfranchised by the law and basically the implementation of that executive order, that they had legal representation. So according to the New York Times, in San Francisco, lawyers stood in the international arrivals terminal of the airport offering free assistance to those awaiting detained family members. Several thousand protesters, accompanied by a brass band and drummers, they paraded past check-in counters chanting, "Say it loud, say it clear, refugees are welcome here." In Dallas, hundreds of protesters at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport Terminal passed around pizza and cookies, similar to what you did out there, and children wrote on poster boards and made signs. Lawyers said that 9 people from Iran, Iraq, Sudan, and Syria were still detained at midday that day, and that those being held by immigration, they had immigrant or tourist visas. So one interesting thing, though, was that as the citizens responded, right, some in protest, some in just using their kind of vocational skill to be present here, that actually changed what happened in government. So as a result of their actions, in New York, for example, Governor Cuomo said that his office would offer legal assistance to those detained in airports. So the effects of the citizens actually impacted what a local government did, right? They all stepped up to the plate to fill in the gap. So another example. Let's talk about healthcare a little bit. So first of all, March 7th marked kind of the beginning of the legislative branch's attempt to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. So they failed on 3 different occasions, 3 different laws. Additionally, related to healthcare, I wanted to mention that in the Affordable Care Act, there had been some error in actually the written law of the Affordable Care Act where Congress didn't appropriate funding for the insurance subsidy. So this is what we're hearing about now, right? So this is all in the legislative branch. In April, according to the website at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, an agency of the Department of Health and Human Services, which runs the healthcare.gov website. The other thing that we saw was that I think I've jumped ahead a little bit here. No, the other thing that we saw was that this year, in the open enrollment period, there was a 90% cut in the marketing budget for open enrollment, right? And what the justification was that they wanted to mirror the open enrollment marketing budgets and process with the Medicaid and Medicare process. So what that did was cut down on the resources available to regular American citizens to hear about the plan offerings for open enrollment and the Affordable Care Act. But in October, the executive branch announced that it would also stop making these subsidy payments to insurers, citing that there were legal concerns around the payments. Additionally, the executive branch limited funding for folks that were helping other people get enrolled, right? So I think they were called, I can't think of the name now, navigators. So they were people that would run kind of workshops and things to help folks get enrolled in open enrollment. So that's what the executive branch did. So what did the judicial branch do? The judicial branch actually upheld a lawsuit from the state of California citing that if Congress didn't appropriate money for the program, which is relating to these subsidies, that the Constitution prohibited the executive branch from spending money on the program, even if Congress had previously enacted a statute requiring the expenditure. So basically they said, yep, the executive branch is right. We don't have to pay for it. Wasn't in the law. Congress didn't appropriate it. So let's look what the Citizenry did. The Citizenry, a couple examples. In New Jersey, according to the New Jersey Hospital Association, in response to the recent cuts for the Affordable Care Act funding, there were groups from all across the state that came together to ensure New Jerseyans have the information and resources they needed to get enrolled. So consumers needed to know that they could still get financial assistance, as in years past, if they qualified for free enrollment. So what did the citizens do in light of no marketing budget and confusion around open enrollment and an actual shorter window for folks to get enrolled in healthcare, right? They stepped up. They started their own programs, right? They were in hospitals. They're setting up in hospitals in the middle of the night to get people enrolled. So what I'm not necessarily talking about is people engaging in large protests, which are very important, right? I'm talking about ways that regular, everyday citizens saw it as their duty and their prerogative to step up and fill gaps, right? Where either the law was broken or the ways that it was moving through the system seemed to be broken. So each of these examples show us how people are working to uphold American values and the law. And each of us has a role to play in not only being knowledgeable about these things, but also thinking creatively about how we might act. So I wanted to use this time too to plug our new center a little bit, but just to talk a little bit about, this is the way that we're thinking about things too as it relates to you students, thinking about the ways, the pathways that we're calling them, that you can be engaged, right? Not all of you feel the need to protest. Not all of you feel the need to volunteer necessarily, but what can you do to make an impact, either politically or just in your community? So this is something that you're going to be seeing, but I wanted to introduce you to these pathways for social impact. But what I want you to call you to even more is to think about your own skill set, think about your own passions, think about the ways that you might be uniquely equipped to step up in a moment of need, right? Because we are the people. Thank you.